This video is going to deal with how to write a congressional debate outline. We're going to be showing you not only how to write the outline, but how it actually turns into an actual speech, which you'll see at the end of this video. So the purpose of a congressional debate outline is to serve as the notes for your speech. You do not have to have your speech memorized. The outline is there to help you remember the things that you want to talk about. We don't write out our speeches word for word. That'd be asking, first of all, a lot of work from you, but it also means that you would want to read that word for word, and we'll find out in a moment that that's not what we're looking for. Only the most important information is going to go on the outline, and we'll give you some examples of that here in a few minutes. So we're going to use incomplete sentences where possible. The less that you write on the outline, the better it is. And that goes completely contrary to most of the assignments that you complete for any other class. You think that the more that you put on there, the better it is. In this case, the more you put down, the worse it is. I want the least amount of information on there, because the less that you have on there, the less that you're going to be referring to it during the speech. You do have to be familiar with your topic. You don't have to memorize it, but when you look at your outline and you see a few words that are there, it should remind you about what you want to say about that particular information. Keeping your eye contact with judges is the absolutely most important thing that you can do. Students do get penalized by judges when it appears that they're reading excessively from their notes. If a teacher were up in the front of the room just reading a lecture to you, you would be extremely bored. And that's exactly the way it works when you're in front of a judge in a room and all that you're doing is reading off a sheet of paper. It's not very compelling. It's not very interesting. Judges don't like it, and they will penalize you if you're reading excessively from an outline. So the congressional debate outline form itself, first of all, you'll find a copy of it in the team's classroom. You're only going to use this form. I don't want you creating your own forms or anything like that. It's located either in the Advanced Congress Teams classroom or the Novice Teams classroom for Congress, and you'll find it under Files. After completing the congressional debate outline form, you'll file it under Speeches on Prepped for the specific piece of legislation that your outline covers. If the outline that you're saving is for a con speech dealing with the second piece of legislation from the TFA fall packet, please give it a file name, Con 02 TFA fall, that identifies the side, the piece of legislation number, and the packet that you're working with. And of course, be sure to click Private at the bottom so that other students cannot view your outline. This is the outline form, and we're going to go through each of the parts of it and tell you what should be completed there. The yellow portion is kind of the header of the outline, and that's going to contain your name. The B/R number is the bill or resolution number. This is the number of the piece of legislation that you are writing an outline for. And for the third line there, this speech supports pro or con. You would obviously type in pro or con. The introduction is where you're going to put down your idea for how you're going to begin the speech. This might be a quote. This might be an interesting story or something. There'll be a video that talks about how to do introductions, but the information for the introduction would go in this portion of the outline. The signpost is where you're going to tell the audience about the two arguments that you're going to be making. So you see under signpost, the number 1 is highlighted, and that's where you're going to type in the tagline for the first argument. You'll notice that down below, just a little bit under developing arguments, number 1 is also highlighted. What you put in for the signpost at number 1 also goes under number 1 for developing arguments. Remember to keep your taglines to a maximum of 7 to 9 words. The second argument under the signpost would be taglined in a similar fashion to number 1, and you'll notice that down below the number 2 is highlighted under developing arguments. So the same tagline that you put in the signpost for number 2 goes under developing arguments for number 2. And the final part of the speech outline form is under developing arguments, statistic or support. So for each argument that you are making, you're going to be offering statistics or support. When you put this on the outline, you're going to put down either the name of the person, the name of the publication, and you certainly are going to put the complete date. You don't just put a year, you put the complete date. After identifying who said it, where it came from, and the date, you then put down the piece of information that is important from that source. Remember, we're not using full sentences. We're just putting the most important things. So if it says that such and such a proposal causes 50,000 people to become unemployed, you just put 50,000 unemployed. You see the 3 that are listed under developing argument number 1, and you see 2 that are listed under developing argument number 2. There's actually a third one, it just doesn't fit on the screen real easily. You certainly want to use more than one statistic or support to make an argument. 2 is preferred. If you can do it relatively quickly, you may use a third, but remember that an argument needs to be a combination of evidence and analysis, with analysis being telling us what that information means, because just spewing information out to a judge doesn't mean that they get it. The analysis is designed to help them understand what that evidence means and how it helps to prove the argument that you're making. So now that you know how to fill out the outline form, let's go ahead and put it to practical use. Here's a piece of legislation called the Teacher Diversity and Retention Act. So one of the arguments in this particular debate is going to be that a lot of our teachers look the same, that we don't have enough racial diversity, and especially in some socioeconomically diverse schools, we really need it. So this piece of legislation is going to be providing competitive grants to institutions of higher education to try to provide teachers some training so that they can go into those socioeconomically diverse schools and provide some racial diversity to the teachers. So we're going to go ahead and start building the arguments, and at the end of this, I'm going to show you the speech that comes from this particular outline. So here's an outline form, and at the top we put our name, the number of the piece of legislation, and the side that we're going on. And here's basically the order that I think that you ought to try to fill out the outline in. So the first thing that we have on here is the first argument that forced diversity is destructive. So we've put that in the signpost area, and we put that in the argument area. So now we need to go ahead and look for some support and some evidence to support this argument. Forced diversity is destructive. So now we're in prepped, and we're going to go to the packet for NSDA Nationals and take a look at the piece of legislation here on teacher diversity. Now, having read these articles before, the first one that I want to take a look at here is this article right here. And having read it, what I want to do is to go ahead and come down here, and here's a paragraph right here that says, force-feeding diversity to your hiring manager is ultimately destructive. Not only do these prescriptive programs fail to attack the problem at its roots, they also cause resentment within the workforce. So we're going to take that, and this little gavel right here is creating an argument. Forced diversity is counterproductive. And it creates it like that, and it saves it. So now let's go ahead and put that into the outline. So you see under the forced diversity is destructive argument, we put in VentureBeat, January 29th, 2017, force feeding diversity. And that's exactly what we're mentioning from that particular article. Now, there's a second piece of evidence that I want to put under this argument. So let's go back to Prepped and find that. Okay, let's get out of this particular article. And the next article that we need for evidence on this first argument is going to come from Forbes. And we come down here. And here's a sentence. Diversity should be an outcome of your efforts to maximize your company's performance, not a condition that you're trying to impose. So once again, I can hit this. And there's the tagline I could put for that argument. And that goes in there. And now I'll show you where it goes in the outline. And now you see where that evidence from Forbes, April 2nd, 2018 is placed into the outline, and that we just put the most important information there. Now we're going to go ahead and create our second argument, and it looks like this. So the second argument that we put in the signpost is that grants will de-incentivize removing ineffective minority teachers. And we put that same tagline in under the second argument where the body of the speech is. So now let's go and get some evidence to support that. Okay, we're back in Prep. We're going to get out of this article, and we're going to go to this article right here from Education Week called "It's Far Too Hard to Fire Bad Teachers." And when we come down here, we find out that there's a study that the Fordham Institute has just done. And of the 25 districts, the results show it's possible to fire ineffective teachers in 7 of them. And in another 13 districts that are rated as difficult to fire these teachers, they call it very difficult. So we're going to take that and put it into our outline. And there is your evidence from Education Week on December 8th, 2016, that bad teachers have some of the most negative effects on education. Most districts don't have easy way to get rid of bad teachers because of tenure. So now we need one more piece of evidence for that. We'll go back to Prepped. All right, and we'll get out of this article that we were in. And here is one from the Fordham Institute. And if we come down here a little ways. And we've got research also shows that achievement would rise, achievement gaps would narrow, lifetime income would increase, and the economic growth would surge if we identified and replaced the bottom 5 to 10% of teachers. So that's an argument. And there's the argument. And here is where we would place it in the outline. And there is the evidence from the Fordham Institute from December 12th that achievement would rise, achievement gaps would narrow, lifetime income would increase. So those are the things that came out of that article. So now it's time for us to finish up the outline form. So now it's time, I think, to go ahead and write the introduction for this, now that we know what it is that we're going to be saying in the speech. And Tommy has gone ahead and added a nice couple of sentences there to get the attention of the audience. And that means that there's one more part of the outline that needs to be complete. And here's what it would look like. And then we go ahead and add the conclusion here, which makes a reference back to the introduction, which provides some closure in the speech. So now what we'll do is we'll go ahead and watch the speech that Tommy gave using this outline, so you can see what the finished product looks like and how the outline actually works in terms of helping him with the speech.
In episode 1065 of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, Mr. Rogers invited Officer Clemens, a black police officer, onto his show to join him and cool his feet in a small plastic wading pool, destroying a color barrier in the process. But it's because this piece of legislation induces forced racism that only perpetuates our racial struggles here in America that we have to fail. First, because forced diversity is destructive. And second, because grants, which this piece of legislation does, will de-incentivize removing ineffective minority teachers. But first, let's talk about how forced diversity is destructive. Representative Smith, I agree that tolerance and diversity are extremely important, but we should all agree that the way this piece of legislation goes about it is wrong. VentureBeat found on January 29th of 2017 that force-feeding diversity, which is exactly what this piece of legislation does, is simply destructive. That's because not only do these prescriptive programs fail to attack the problem at its roots, but they also create resentment within schools. Representatives, we should hire teachers because they're great teachers, not just because they're a minority. That's why Forbes corroborates on April 2nd of 2018 that diversity should be an outcome of our efforts to maximize school performance, not a condition that we try to impose. If we truly want to increase diversity in our schools, let's focus on hiring great teachers, not just minority ones. But second, let's talk about how grants, which this specific piece of legislation gives, will de-incentivize removing ineffective minority teachers. Now, in no way am I implying today that minority teachers are generally bad. Quite the opposite. But there are a few bad apples. That's why Education Week found on December 8th of 2016 that bad teachers have some of the most negative effects on education. Yet most school districts, including the one I'm from, Houston Independent School District, don't have easy ways to get rid of bad teachers because of tenure or challenges to their being fired. Here's why that's really problematic. The Fordham Institute found on December 12th that if we were to get rid of bad or ineffective teachers, achievement within our minority groups would rise, and achievement gaps between our minorities would actually narrow, meaning that lifetime income would increase and economic growth would surge if we just fired our bad teachers. Now, this piece of legislation would de-incentivize firing minority teachers who are bad because these schools would lose their grants. Representative Smith, if we want to ensure the achievement of our minority students, which I am so in support of, failing and allowing for the firing of bad teachers who are minorities are the only way. So, representatives, if Mr. Rogers and Officer Clemens were to come here and see this piece of legislation, I'm certain they'd be appalled. It's because the only way to destroy racism here at home is to value character over color, the opposite of what this piece of legislation does, that we ultimately have to fail.